What secrets do these mummies hold? Decades ago, researchers discovered hundreds of naturally mummified bodies buried in boats in an arid desert in northwestern China. Dated to 4,000 years ago, the mummies' clothing and grave goods led some researchers to postulate that they were migrants from Western Asia. However, new DNA evidence published in the journal Nature suggests that the so-called Tarim mummies were actually directly descended from a population that inhabited the region during the Ice Age. Initially, the mummies' Western attire and European appearance led to the hypothesis that they were the remains of an Indo-European group of migrants with roots in Europe, perhaps related to Bronze Age herders in Siberia or farmers in what is now Iran. They had blonde, brown and red hair, large noses, and wore shiny, sometimes elaborate, clothing made of wool, fur or cowhide. Some wore pointed hats, similar to those worn by witches, and some of their clothing was made of felt or woven cloth, suggesting ties to Western European culture. Others wore plaid fabrics reminiscent of the Celts, most notably one of the mummies known as the Cherchan Man, who stood over 2 meters tall, had red hair and a full beard, and was buried over 1,000 years ago wearing a tartan kilt. Another of the most famous corpses is that of the so-called Princess, or Belle, of Zhaohe, a 3,800-year-old woman with light hair, high cheekbones, and long preserved eyelashes who appears to be smiling in death. Although she wore a large felt hat and fine clothes and even jewelry, it is unclear what position she may have held in her society. These bodies were not intentionally mummified as part of any funerary ritual. Rather, the dry, saline environment of the Tarim Basin, which contains the Taklamakan Desert, one of the largest in the world, allowed the bodies to decompose slowly and sometimes minimally. The area's extreme winter cold is also thought to have aided their preservation. According to the researchers, many bodies were buried in boat-shaped wooden coffins, covered with cattle hides and marked with wooden poles or oars. The discovery of the herb ephedra in the burials suggests it had a medical or religious significance, but it remains unclear what that religion might have been, nor why some burials included concentric rings of wooden stakes. The masks, twigs and animal bones found in the mummy cemeteries offer a tantalizing glimpse into their daily lives and rituals. Although most questions about their culture remain unanswered, the burials point to their diet and the fact that they were farmers. The mummies were buried with barley, millet and wheat, and even necklaces containing the oldest cheese ever found. This indicates that they not only engaged in agriculture, but also raised ruminant animals. The people of the Tarim Basin were genetically distinct, but their practices, from burial to cheese-making, and their clothing, which reflects techniques and crafts practiced in distant places at the time, seem to show that they mingled with and learned from other cultures, adopting their practices over time and incorporating them into a distinct civilization. Researchers now believe their daily lives ranged from ruminant husbandry to metalworking and basketry, contributed to by the fact that the now desolate desert of the Tarim Basin region was once much greener and had abundant fresh water. It is also believed that the inhabitants of the Tarim Basin traded and interacted with other peoples along what would eventually become a key Silk Road corridor, linking east and west across the arid desert. In 1995, Mayer stated that the earliest mummies in the Tarim Basin were exclusively Caucasian or Europoid, with East Asian immigrants arriving in the eastern parts of the Tarim Basin around 3,000 years ago, while the Uyghur people arrived around 842. In attempting to trace the origins of these populations, Victor Mayer's team suggested that they may have reached the region via the Pamir Mountains around 5,000 years ago. Mayer said the new findings also compel a re-examination of ancient Chinese books that describe historical or legendary figures of great stature, with deep blue or green eyes, long noses, bushy beards, and red or blonde hair. Scholars have traditionally scoffed at these accounts, but now it seems they may be accurate. In 2007, the Chinese government authorized a National Geographic Society team, led by Spencer Wells, to examine the mummy's DNA. Wells managed to extract undegraded DNA from the internal tissues. The scientists extracted enough material to suggest that the Tarim Basin was continuously inhabited from 2000 BC to 300 BC, and preliminary results indicate that the inhabitants, rather than having a single origin, came from Europe, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and other regions yet to be determined. It should be emphasized that all of these areas most likely have a common origin. That is, they descended from a single people in ancient times. The possible presence of Indo-European language speakers in the Tarim Basin around 2000 BCE could be interpreted as evidence that cultural exchanges occurred between Indo-European and Chinese populations at a very early date. It has been suggested that techniques such as chariot warfare and bronze making may have been transmitted eastward by these Indo-European nomads. Mallory and Mayer also note that Sidam. Before approximately 2000 BCE, metal artifacts found in cultures in the area that now corresponds to northwestern China are extremely rare, simple, and, curiously, already made of alloyed copper, and therefore questionable. Isolated for millennia beneath the relentless sand of the desert, the Tarim mummies give us a glimpse that doesn't quite fit with established narratives about Asia's past. Their bodies speak a language that defies simple categories. They carry traces of vanished cultures, of technologies and customs that traveled farther and earlier than we thought possible. And yet, we still don't know for sure who they were, where they came from, or what they knew of the world around them. Perhaps their greatest legacy is not what they tell us, but what they still compel us to ask.